Royal Enfield Electra X, general overview, buyer's guide and things you might want to know about as an owner. I won't go too much into Royal Enfield's history in India. It's pretty well known they started production in 1955 with a 350 bullet, and in the years that followed, even after the demise of a British company, they carried on with the same design, making small modifications and changes to it as they went. Principal amongst those changes, you can see here, would be a disc brake that would eventually replace the drum brake on the originals. This models are fitted with indicators by now, again because the electrical system has been upgraded from the positive earth 6 volt to a negative earth 12 volt system, similar to used by Japanese and most other manufacturers in the world. And on these models as well, an electric start was added to make starting easier, and other little bits and pieces such as more modern switchgear. On the Electra X, unlike a lot of the earlier bullets, the side panels were also replaced with something more modern looking. Now these initial bikes here were produced for a long time, from 1955, based on this engine design, all the way to 2008. The original company, Enfield India, unfortunately, tended to get a bit blasé. And what eventually happened is that, in almost a repeat run of what happened to the British industry actually, they didn't really bother to replace tooling when they needed to. They just carried on putting the money they made in the bank. And eventually you got to the stage at which the machines they produced in, the quality actually dropped even with the changes they made. This of course resulted in less sales. And so by about 1990, as a running concern, Enfield India was having some real problems. So they entered into a collaboration with the Eitra Group, which is a very, very large manufacturer in India of many different types of vehicles. This is to be the turning point in Enfield India's history, I think, really is the best way of putting it. They immediately started to make cutbacks. They introduced a voluntary redundancy scheme to get rid of a load of the workforce. They closed down several factories and closed down several parts of the company, such as industrial engines and the such like, and the little 50cc Zundaps that they thought weren't really adding anything into the mix. Eventually, in 1994, and the purchase of more shares, they would officially become a full part of the Eitra Group, with the Eitra Group actually owning Enfield India. From this point on, things were about to take a turn very much for the better. Production of bullets continued, but it soon became aware, with ever-increasing emissions regulations around the world, that the original 1950s design engine wasn't really going to be able to carry on much longer. Production was started, or rather research was starting to producing an engine that could take the pre-unit engine's place and carry on for a few more years, which would be a unit construction engine. This was intended to come in 2008, but it quickly became apparent that there'd be one last round of Euro regulations, I think it was probably Euro 2, that the old Enfield was going to have a real trouble getting through. So this bike they produced here, the Electra X, was the answer. Large parts of the engine were heavily redesigned to make it more economical and less polluting. The cylinder head was changed, and I believe the barrel was also modified to suit it, to make the whole engine burn leaner. The idea being more air in the mix, less fuel, means less pollution. The disadvantages of this, of course, is that the engines tend to run a lot hotter like that. So a lot of research had to go into making that work. Other changes to get it through these emission controls included a CV carburettor in place of a more usual, at the time, throttle slide carburettor. And all these bikes had a clean air, like recycling system fitted to them. Although, to be perfectly honest, all these years past it, a lot of owners did remove that from the machines, simply because you can make them run just a little bit better by removing it. Right. The performance of these machines was, as you'd expect, not exactly to Japanese standards. But there again, if you're after one of these to go fast, you're really looking in the wrong place. Most sources seem to agree on a brake horsepower of about 26 for these. But what you get with that as well is a lot of torque and a nice flat power delivery curve. Means pretty much you can take these out in any weather and know that it's not going to do anything unexpected to you. If really pushed, I have done it once on this, these engines will get up to about 84, I think 85, maybe a tad more if you've got a good one. But to be quite honest, if you do that all the time, you're missing the point of the bike, and B, it isn't going to last long. You're going to kill it quite quickly. I personally spend most of my time on this doing about 65, 70 if I'm on the main road. You don't need to be doing much more than that. But where these score, even more than my Kawasaki, is that they are such fun to ride. The truth is, although the Kawasaki does 160, 9 times out of 10 these days, you'll find me out on this bike instead. And I think that pretty much says it all. Maintenance on these, again, is the complete opposite of the Kawasaki, but this time in a good way. Whereas I describe bits of a Kawasaki, particularly the shim under bucket valve adjustment, as being a butt ache, everything on this bike is easy to reach and easy to work on. Starting this side, spark plug, right there out in the open. Talking about these, I've had issues on this with Ngk Spark Plugs. I know a lot of other people have these type of engines as well. And I'm not talking about all the fake ones out there, I'm talking genuine ones that I get through my local shop. I'm not sure what causes it, but some engines just put an Ngk in and it just lasts about 2 weeks, then it just dies and the engine starts farting and backfiring. I actually run this on a type of spark plug called Brisk, which are available from a company called F2 Motorcycles, and run by a nice man called David Angel. If you've got an old British bike or single and it's playing up on the plugs, try giving him a call. It's definitely worth getting these, I think. Moving around to the other side, on the Kawasaki, I said that getting the oil filter out, you had to get it past the exhaust and all sorts. And it's, on this bike here, that cylinder there at the bottom, that's the oil filter. Just one nut at the end, undo that, take off the cover, out it slides. Valve tappet adjustment behind this cover here, again one nut, take it out, and it's simple. Every single maintenance job on this machine is easy. Considering it's basically a 1950, 70-year-old engine design now, I've had no troubles with this engine at all. It's been incredibly reliable from the day I bought it to now. The only time it did stop is when the battery, well, not long after I bought it, I hadn't changed the battery and the battery was just totally goosed, the old one. It stopped dead in the middle of the stubby and wouldn't go anywhere. Put a new battery on it a couple of years ago, I suppose, and it's just carried on ever since. It's never ever missed a beat. The finish on these bikes is good, but with one proviso. Same as the Ural I owned many years ago, there's 2 types of these Enfields. There's what they call the export bikes, which is the ones they sent out to countries like England and America, and the home market bikes. Now, the ones they exported officially, like this, were built to a higher standard. The paint, everything, was done with a bit more care. The home market bikes are a darn sight rougher. if you can, always try and get one which is officially imported into the country you live in, because you'll be getting a better machine. For paint, I'm not sure if it is real enamel or not. It's got that feel of real enamel. It's deep and it's really nice actually. The petrol cap there isn't standard. That's an aftermarket bit. You actually, if you buy one of these bikes, you will find quite a few aftermarket bits and pieces available for them, but I'll cover that a bit more later on. The chrome's good. Yeah, okay, the exhaust is looking a bit its age now, but bear in mind that exhaust is 16, 17 years old. It's the original, and it's still there, so you can't really knock that. Actually, I tell a lie. I believe that's an aftermarket exhaust, because it doesn't have the air recirculation system on it, but I've got to think it's been there a few years. The original Indian chrome, if you look at the handlebars and that, not a problem at all. So the finish really is not bad at all. Handling on these bikes, it's fine. So it is, if you feel inclined to try it, you can lean it over till everything scrapes. In fact, I believe if you look on the other side, you can see on this footrest here, because these don't pivot, they're fixed, you can see just how much this has been leaned. This whole front edge here has been worn away. Tyres look amazingly skinny compared to Japanese bikes, but they do the job perfectly. And unlike Japanese bikes, don't cost a fortune. That's actually an important consideration on these. Bits you buy for these machines, you'll think you'll be quite pleasantly surprised as to the price you can pay for them, as opposed to Japanese or Italian or American or anything. The bits for them are very, very competitively priced. Brakes on this, like I say, by the time this bike was produced, they'd moved away from the original drum brake to this single front brake caliper here, disc brake. It says on it Pricol, but I do believe that's basically a license-built Indian copy of an Italian Brembo brake. It certainly feels sharp enough. It's actually quite scarily easy to lock the front wheel on this, more so than on the Kawasaki. The back brake though is still the traditional drum brake on this, although to be quite honest, it's okay when you're standing still. If you're actually moving, it's hard to actually feel it doing anything. It isn't a particularly effective back brake. A quick note on this brake though system, like a lot of British bikes of the time, it had what they called a quickly detachable rear wheel. So you could actually take the back wheel out of the machine while leaving the rear chain, brake mechanism, all that lot in place, meaning you didn't have to readjust the chain or anything else and you put it all back together again. Easy. Faults on these. Principally two faults. The first one, which I'll cover, are big end bearings. These Electra X models went through a phase of knocking out the big end bearings on the crankshaft. It seems to be the case that it tended to happen quite early in their lives, so it'd be in the first few hundred or first few thousand miles, and it'd either happen or it wouldn't. It's a fair assumption that by the time you pick one up now, it's either happened to it in the past and been fixed, or it's not going to. In fact, if you look at all the Facebook groups, you very rarely come across one of these machines now that has done a big end. So I think there's probably very few out there waiting to go. But something to bear in mind, if you're going to buy one, take someone with you who at least knows what the engine should sound like when it's running. You should be able to hear a knackered big end bearing just purely from a knocking it's making. The second real problem with these is a darn sight more common, and that is the electric start. Now all electric starts operate through a thing called a sprag clutch. which is basically a device that allows the electric start motor to turn the engine over. These engines were obviously never designed with an electric start, so the whole system on this, it was designed in England funnily enough, is all a bit Heath Robinson. The spread clutches on these can go frighteningly quickly, unfortunately. And when they do, it's quite expensive to repair. All the time the electric start's working, it works really well. The advice generally about it is if it's working, your electric start, a lot of it depends on how you stop the engine. Never ever stop the engine, it's going to sound odd, I'm sorry, by turning off the ignition key or using the kill switch on the handlebars up here. The only way they recommend stopping the engine on these is using the decompressor. Now, so the standard decompressor on these was part of the handlebar arrangement, the instrument lever here. Mine that's been disconnected and it's been moved to here instead. That is how you should stop your engine. On mine you just got to go like that and it will stop the engine. The reason is, it seems to be that there's a brief moment, if you stop the engine too quickly, if it can sort of just run back even for a fraction, it can wipe out that spread clutch on the starter motor. Even if it has gone, say you've got two choices. You can fix them, all the parts are available but they're not cheap and it's a lot of work. Or a lot of owners just chuck the whole thing away essentially and just convert the whole bike over to kickstart only again. That's the beauty of these, you do have a kickstart. Both methods work fine on this particular machine. The kickstart works perfectly, so does the electric start. So it's down to... But they are the two main faults you need to keep in mind if you're going to buy one. Right, now, why should you buy one? It's hard to describe unless you've actually ridden one, just what an enormous amount of fun it is barreling around on one of these bikes. Okay, you're not going fast, but then you don't have to. When I'm out on this machine, and bear in mind I do have a 160 mile an hour Kawasaki as well, you spend the entire journey with just a big grin on your face. It's almost entirely unavoidable. Parts are easy to source, they're readily available and they're cheap. And there's a company called Hitchcock's that basically, if you've got a Royal Enfield, whatever you think you might need for it, Hitchcock's will have it. It's unbelievable the stuff they sell for these. Now, Royal Enfield no longer produce the bullet models as such. They've just brought out the 350 Classic, which looks like a bullet, but it's essentially based on the chassis and engine of a Meteor. But there's certainly no plans to continue with a 500 bullet from the looks of it. When I bought this one, the AVL engines, like this, were by far the cheapest for the Enfield bullets to buy, I believe. I paid £1,400 for this one when I first bought it. But prices now, because they aren't being made anymore, prices now are on the rise. But you should still be able to pick up a nice one of these for £2,000 or just under, I reckon. Lovely, isn't it? Before I go, just an interesting thought. These particular bikes, the Electra X's, are often seen as the end of an era, the end of the original 1940s, 1950s pre-unit Royal Enfield engine, before the unit construction one came in 2008. And it is that. But it's also the start of a new era. This cylinder head and the clean air system that went with it was the very first time that Enfield India made a major engine part for one of these machines. Up till this point, it had just been a matter of copying and improving the original Redditch designed Royal Enfield Bullet. This bike doesn't just mark the end of an era, it marks the start of them designing and building their own engines, but in a small way. The company now, since then, have produced obviously the unit construction bullets. The Himalayan was an all new design, again down to Royal Enfield India. And of course you now have the two phenomenally successful 650 twins, the Interceptor and the Continental GT, also designed by the Indian company. But I say, this bike here marks the point at which they started to move away from being just a straight copier to actually doing engine design in their own right. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. I get lots of views. I would ask you all, if at all possible, I love you people watching these videos. If you could put a like next to your videos, actually on YouTube itself, that'd be great. It means more people get to see them. And if you could consider subscribing, that'd be even better. Thanks again for your time. Hope you enjoyed this particular video and this bike. And have a good day. Ride safely.